Hello everyone, welcome back to the Hindu Explainer series. I am Kushagra Goel and very warm greetings from Law Prep Tutorial. I once again hope that all of you are taking all the precautions that are necessary for protection against COVID-19. At the same time, I hope that those who are above the age of 18 have also registered themselves for COVID vaccination at the COVID portal or their website, or you have used the mobile app to do that and booked your necessary slots to get the vaccine. Because see, the only way for us to end the pandemic is actually to get or achieve immunity against it, which we can get once we have vaccines in our blood. So on that note, I'll begin with the newspaper analysis. So on the front page, a news story that we had discussed yesterday only, that the world's biggest T20 league has been indefinitely postponed. That IPL 14 has now been suspended, postponed, because the bio bubble that was there prepared to protect the participants from getting infected by the virus has been breached. Multiple cases or multiple players tested positive for COVID-19 as part of their daily testing, because of which teams had to be isolated, and so the tournament cannot go on anymore. And BCCI Vice President Rajiv Shukla confirmed yesterday that the IPL has now been suspended. That suitable look a window later during the year, it could be September, but these are all speculations, and as of now we are not conducting it any further. That it may resume if whenever it happens, all of that we will be notified. However, that as of now the tournament has been suspended. So that is one news. Then on the right hand side, Prime Minister Modi yesterday spoke to the Bengal governor over post-poll violence that has been happening for the past 2 days in West Bengal. There is allegations by the parties who lost the election that their cadres are being attacked by TMC workers, the party that won the election. Mamata Banerjee, the chief minister, has appealed for peace. Victory parades were already banned and after the election, so that needs to be verified as to what is happening. Those indulging in violence should be taken into custody. All of that. So thus, that is something on violence related news post poll. Apart from that, another big story is related to oxygen supply, as the central government has failed to provide the necessary oxygen that is being allocated to Delhi, that which they have not been able to do. Now, yesterday, the High Court asked a show cause notice to the central government as to why the order of Supreme Court is being ignored, that the necessary oxygen is not being supplied. The court using harsh words that you can put your head in the sand like an ostrich. We will not do that. That people are dying. The situation is important. It is an emergency situation, but the government has not been listening. Supply of oxygen is the responsibility of the central government, and therefore that is not being fulfilled. People are dying because of oxygen shortage. So that problem is what has been highlighted. Now the central government needs to respond. All right, so that is one news. Contempt of court is another matter that is there. We need to wait for how the response is. We'll once again talk about it. We did an in-depth analysis of that. So based on it, whatever is the decision, I will tomorrow do an in-depth analysis on that nevertheless. Then on the front page, the other news is about an accident that happened in Mexico City, the capital of Mexico. We'll be talking about it at the international news page. Then another important news is that the central government, the Ministry of Communications, has now given go-ahead for 5G trials in India. India has also left out Chinese companies, that is Huawei and ZTE, out of 5G trials. So the trials will be conducted by European companies such as Ericsson, Nokia, South Korean companies such as Samsung and C-Dot, will be partnering with other telecommunication service providers of India, that is Bharti Airtel, Reliance Jio, Infocom, Vodafone Idea Limited and MTNL, which is India's public sector company. So India can finally start the rollout of 5G, and along with this, the trial for 5G I technology will also be done, which is an advanced version of 5G. 5G technology, better than 4G, fourth generation of internet connectivity, is capable of actually conducting remote surgeries through robotics. So that is one big news, that once this rollout happens, we can move towards the 5G mass base. Then moving on the other national news, more and more about despair and finding ambulances remains an ordeal, oxygen shortage, all of that is still happening. The COVID pandemic is ravaging through the country. More and more states are going into lockdown to protect or curb the spread of the virus at different levels. Then moving on the editorial front. So on the editorial front, the main editorial is one that talks about how the second wave and how India, after 17 years, for the first time has accepted foreign aid. Now, why did India decide to not accept foreign aid for the past 17 years? The reason was clear. Whenever an international country provides you assistance, the answer is they claim that, see, we came to your moment of need, now you need to provide or give us concessions, that when your chips were down, we lent you a hand, and now you cannot say no to what we require. So that wherewithal and autonomy that a country has, something that we will now lose because we are taking aid from different countries. In that regard, the editorial discusses how it can blunt our foreign policy initiatives. So Prime Minister Modi, overall foreign policy is something that has been outwardish, in the sense that he wants to project India as a regional and a global power. But as India has taken aid not only from big countries such as US and European Union countries, it has also taken aid from other Southeast Asian countries. So to reflect yourself as a regional power, you cannot come across as weak or dependent. And at the same time, because of our low vaccine production, we are now falling short of our obligations to provide vaccines to these countries. We have stopped the supply of vaccine Metri. We have stopped the supply of export of vaccines, something we were supposed to do. And in that regard, China has been moving in to expand its influence. So you cannot come across as a leader when you are taking assistance. You cannot reflect yourself as a primary or even a global power when you can't even handle a crisis in your own country. Another thing that the COVID pandemic wave will do is that it will have a long-term effect. When mass deaths happen, the economic cost of it is also there. When people who are breadwinners of their families and contributors to the economy are also not, when they pass away, to replace them, you need time period to recoup. So Indian government will focus on domestic issues. It will work on that regard. So there will be once again lower amount of resources to lend or extend to other countries for influence. South Asian countries are looking for assistance for their own development. Now, India at this point of time is needing assistance from other countries to even tide over the COVID pandemic, which shows that it lacks resources to do it. When you have lack of resources for yourself, how will you provide assistance to them? And in that regard, our influence in these countries will diminish even further. Another thing is that the government will now focus on its political initiatives, as elections in Uttar Pradesh and then the general elections will be round the corner. To be in power, the government will have to tide over the domestic politics. That is something that is there. The third impact will be seen on India-China equation. So India has still adopted a conciliatory approach to Beijing. It has not hardlined. We have not banned complete trade from China. We have taken token decisions, like banned certain apps from there, strict implementation of rules of origin. But nevertheless, the trade with China has still expanded only. The Chinese export to India has increased over time. Our dependency for medical equipment from China is there. Oxygen concentrators, oximeters, basic medicines that we are needing for COVID-19 pandemic right now, all of them are coming in from China. And therefore it shows that, see, for all the claim that we would take benefit of China being the epicenter of COVID-19, it is us who are now suffering far more. And then all of this will reduce our strategic autonomy, because Western countries, especially United States, will now push India towards its own agenda. That, see, we came to your aid, now you need to give us something back in return. Along with this, because countries will then also take note that, see, India is incapable of standing tall to China. They will realize that, see, we can't put all our chips into India. As Quad initiative, all the countries were seeing India as the one who would be the primary front line against Chinese expansion. But if India itself is down and is dependent on China, that those bets will be off the table, which will further blunt overall our situation in foreign policy. So the mishandling of the COVID-19 could have larger and long-term impact, not only on how we work as an economic society, but also our long-term global aspirations. So that is the editorial. Then on the left-hand side is about DMK return and how Tamil Nadu voted. The second one is about Kerala and how the leadership of Mr. Vijayan has standed tall to its challenges. But the second editorial here, an issue of lives versus livelihood, it reflects upon the misery of the migrant workers. As lockdowns are returning, migrant workers once again face the same ordeal task of moving back from the states where they have migrated to the rural areas where there is already a lack of job. Primary reason why they had to travel to the cities in the first place. Despite this being the second journey that they have to take within a span of year, Indian state government and central government has failed to maintain any data about them, has failed to maintain any specific policies to address their concerns, which shows their general lack of apathy of policy making towards the migrant workers. So that is what the editorial discusses. Then the post-poll analysis, not relevant for us. On the other news, so on the national news, one is a clear message from Supreme Court. Under the new CJI, Supreme Court has taken far more cases in regard to upholding the rights of the people, which is for fundamental rights. So the explanation sustains upon the case of Siddique Kappan, who has been in jail under UAPA by the UP police, but and still no charge sheet or clear evidence has been produced. Under UAPA, unless the charges are finally overtaken, you cannot be released. But the Supreme Court realized that his medical situation was deteriorating and transferred him to Delhi. Similarly, in regards to challenging the central government with regards to its handling of COVID-19 pandemic, the Supreme Court has been at the forefront of supporting people or recognizing. And lastly, something that we discussed yesterday, it shot down the request of Election Commission to not report any criticism of the handling of Election Commission with regards to assembly elections. It is known that COVID-19 protocols were not followed in these elections, which has contributed to high number of cases in the states which conducted election. Then on the other news is about Jagmohan Malhotra, a career bureaucrat of India, who was one of the last persons who had worked from the very beginning of our very first Prime Minister to the most recent one. An experienced bureaucrat with an experience to have worked with all Prime Ministers of India till now. Jagmohan Malhotra served as bureaucrat and governor, and he had 2 specific tenures in Jammu and Kashmir. He was also an awardee of Padma Shri in 1971, Padma Bhushan in 1977, and then Padma Vibhushan in 2016. And his autobiography is known as My Frozen Turbulence in Kashmir, where he lists out his time period. He was the bureaucrat, the governor in charge in 1990 when the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits happened in the valley of Jammu and Kashmir. He ensured safe passage of them. So that is also another contribution that he has made vis-a-vis Indian politics in general. So he has passed away this year. So this is an obituary in regard to him. Then moving on the other national news. So yesterday, Twitter suspended the account of actress Kangana Ranaut. This is a series of actions. Now, the reason why I've highlighted this is part of series of actions that Twitter has taken to remove or suspend accounts permanently of people using the platform to spread hate. This news becomes relevant because the last president of United States, his Twitter account was also suspended. Twitter account of other people, other Republican senators were also suspended. This was regarding the January 6th Capitol Hill rioting. Then now Kangana Ranaut's Twitter account has also been suspended. She had tweeted about violence and calling for more violence, and in that regard, because of continuous many times that this was this account, so the statement of Twitter was this reference of repeated violations of Twitter's rule of specifically our hateful conduct policy and abusive behavior policy. So now she has two options. If case she believes that this is a violation of her freedom of speech and expression, she can approach the courts in India for restoring her account, but she has to establish that her speech was not actually hate speech. So this is another thing that is related. This year only the government has passed intermediary regulation and of free speech. The conflict between free speech and in general of freedom of speech at such individual platforms, along with the controversy that has happened throughout the year of different personalities. This is another important defense which puts freedom of speech in online sphere and especially social media handles as something that is really important as an issue for CLAT 2021. Then Prime Minister Modi and his counterpart from United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, once again had a virtual summit. They had a conversation. Prime Minister Modi is a guest that is invited to the next month's G7 summit at the leaders level. So he has accepted that invitation. It needs to be seen whether he'll eventually go or not. Along with this, in this virtual summit, once again, there was reiteration about cooperation of India and United Kingdom for vaccines. India hosts the Serum Institute, which is the largest manufacturer of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Along with this, they also reaffirmed their commitment to sign the free trade agreement to double the trade between the two countries. On another news, V. Kalayam, the last personal secretary of Mahatma Gandhi, passed away yesterday, aged 99. He was the secretary of Mahatma Gandhi from 1943 until his passing away in 1948. At the age of 99, he passed away related to age-old ailment. So we have lost the last person regarding who was a direct person who was part of the team with whom Mahatma Gandhi worked during his time period for India's independence. Then moving on, apart from this, India is still reporting high number of cases, that is 3.6, though this is less than what we had reported, that is 4 lakh on Friday last week. So the curve in that sense is declining, but it's still not over. The wave is still there. 3.6 lakh cases is nothing to be happy about. Then moving on the international news. So on the right hand side, the G7 foreign ministers meeting is still going on, a precursor to the leaders level summit which will take place in London. In that regard, all the members have stated that we should have a common front on China because China is a threat to democratic nations. So that is something they have to do. Italy and other countries such as Japan have had different stand than, let's say, United Kingdom and USA vis-a-vis China based on their domestic considerations. So that is something that needs to be seen. Then more updates from Afghanistan, which is that what was feared, that once US troops leave, the fighting in Afghanistan until an agreement was actually reached between Taliban and the Afghan forces was reached, the civil war will go on, and that is what has intensified even more now. That large-scale displacement of Afghan people is now taking place because of intense fighting between Taliban and the Afghan forces. Then moving on, United States is now moving towards adolescents being given the COVID vaccine shot. Pfizer mRNA vaccine will be used to inoculate children or adolescents between the age of 12 to 17 for COVID-19. Then moving on, apart from this is the news from Mexico, which is about a rail accident. A support beam for the metro in Mexico City, which is the capital of Mexico, collapsed yesterday. In that regards, the mayor of the city, Claudia Sheinbaum, told that care was being given to those who are injured. Approximately 23 people have passed away because of the accident. Inquiry is underway of why that happened. Then in other news, Egypt, which is another customer nation and the third largest importer of weapons in the world after Saudi Arabia and India, has now agreed to buy 30 more Rafale fighters. Rafale is the one fighter that the most recent one that India has purchased from France, Dassault Aviation. Then on the economic news, the offshoot of COVID-19 wave are now happening in the country. Microfinancing institutions are talking that there is distress in the country, more so in rural areas. Then there is another news which can become important for us, is US sanctions may spur Adani to exit Myanmar. So United States and other Western countries have moved in to have sanctions on Myanmar because of the coup that has taken place. In that regard, if countries or other companies will they have to exit because of these sanctions is something that needs to be seen. Adani is a company of India which is also building a port, a container terminal in Myanmar. It will have to exit that space if it falls on the wrong side of the sanctions. So this is how sanctions may impact not just investment vis-a-vis from United States, but also of countries with which United States trade, and they also have to comply. So that is exactly one of the reasons why after sanctions were imposed on Iran by USA, India also had to stop importing oil from Iran. So thus, this is how these sanctions work and ensure that allies of countries who have imposed sanctions are also not able to do this. This will create friction on cooperation of India vis-a-vis ASEAN countries and specifically Myanmar. India needs Myanmar to tie down the insurgency and terrorist organizations that operate at the border states in northeast. So that is something that can affect India in the long term if situation in Myanmar does not improve. On that note, I'll conclude for the day. The revision series update is that I am almost in the phase of finishing the recording, so that will be up for you. And I know the importance of it, so therefore don't worry about it. Just to allay your fears. And on that note, in today's newspaper, the most important news. So on policy levels, you need to understand news related to foreign policy, then migrants. Apart from this, the virtual summit of India, United Kingdom, then the suspension of account of Kangana Ranaut, how this is tied to freedom of speech over social media platforms in general. That is it from today's newspaper. On that note, I'll conclude. Take care of yourself and your family members, and I'll see you all tomorrow.